Hello, YouTube. In the archives of Soviet researchers of the unknown, or the paranormal as we say today, there are many reports of UFO sightings and mysterious creatures in the period between the two world wars. That would be between 1919 and 1941. Now, this include mass sightings of mysterious aircraft with flight characteristics unusual for that time. A number of reports mention certain objects rushing low above the ground at such speeds that they cannot be properly considered. In the forest and countryside in those years, huge people or humanoid flying creatures were often observed. Among the pre-war cases, reports of omens or signs in the sky are particularly prominent. Images and drawings, inscriptions in the sky, the flight of some objects with symbolic meaning, and unusual lights that have nothing to do with the northern lights. The disc-shaped objects observed during the period under review are basically no different from the post-war UFOs. The disc color can be any: white, crimson, yellow, silver, and the flight path is both straight and chaotic. Engineer Surkov from Minsk in the summer of 1927, remember this year, was in the village of Solovyovka near Lipetsk on a hot summer day. One day in the middle of the day, in a northerly direction from me at an angle to the horizon of about 60 to 70 degrees, I saw a white disk, as it seemed to me, the size of a dinner plate, or twice as large as the disk of the moon. There were many cumulus clouds in the sky. The disk was facing me with its plane. It was moving at a low speed in an easterly direction. The clouds seemed motionless at that time. I lived in the village of Solovyovka, which is located 20 kilometers south of the city of Lipetsk. Villagers who saw this phenomenon said that it foreshadowed the end of the world. For some reason, their excitement was not transmitted to me. I could not believe that because of this trifle, there could be the end of the world. One thing surprised me. As the disk approached the cloud, the latter gradually disappeared. Then after passing the place where the cloud was, it was restored again with its almost former outlines. The cloud disappearance zone extended over about 5 disk diameters. This was the case with every cloud where the disk passed. From this I concluded that the disk was flying at the height of the clouds. There were no objects hanging from it. From these circumstances, everyone who saw the object concluded that it was not a balloon. The color of the disk was milky, or the same as a cumulus cloud of medium brightness. My observation lasted for several dozens of minutes. Another eyewitness from Minsk, Georgy Anisimovich Popov, observed a disc-shaped object in the winter of 1927-1928 in the village of Lobanovka, Mogilev region. It was around 1927-1928. It was winter, or rather it was in November or December. It was a frosty moonlit evening, and we were getting ready to wash in the bathhouse. This case was in the territory of the Mogilev region in the Cherikov district, the village of Lobanovka. The time was in the evening, about 6 to 7 o'clock in the evening, or rather 18 to 19 o'clock. The men were standing and looking at the sky, and I, as a teenager, also lifted my head up and also saw an oval, thus it was reported, flying like a disc. And they said, "Look, the devil is drying gold on the tail." It's true, I remember it very well, and I don't forget it. And so it flew horizontally several times, flew back and forth. Where it made a turn once, it was visible, but on the eastern side it was not visible. It flew away, apparently far away. And as I now imagine, at an altitude of 2 to 3 kilometers from the surface of the Earth. At first glance, it was visible for more than a meter, but when it turned around, this object seemed to have a fan, a tail. The colors of the whole thing itself were like ripe raspberries, exactly the same color. The weather was frosty, 10 to 15 degrees below zero, and I remember as if it were today. It flew calmly, with turns maybe 7 to 9 times. I cannot say for sure, but the fact that it turned around several times, I saw it well myself, and to this day I can't understand what kind of object it was. I've already been thinking about what kind of thunderstorm it might be, but why exactly it flew horizontally and in one direction. And I also think that back then we did not have literate men among those men who said the devil is drying gold on his tail, and no one turned anywhere. And now I also think that perhaps this ship was from another planet. So I describe to you its full shape and color and flight. Of course, it flew not in circle, but as if along a corridor, and it was clearly visible. I will draw it for you in an imaginable form. What it was, the color was definitely like mature magma. That's how it was, this object. And then, of course, there were no space satellites at that time, so there were no remnants of ships, but there was this mysterious object of some kind. An extremely interesting observation was made in 1928 by an atheist who conducted anti-religious propaganda in the Mari region. This, so that you understand, this was per the Soviet government-sanctioned policies of the socialist country. The observation was group-wide, excluding the assumption of hallucination, and prolonged, which allows us to dismiss the hypothesis of visual deception. Moreover, it was described hot on the heels in a scientific journal of those years. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning when, having driven 18 versts from the Zveniga backwater in February 1928, my companions, the coachman, and a local film technician going down the Ileti River lost our way. By the way, for my audience, versta is an obsolete Russian unit of length, defined as 500 sajen. This makes 1 versta equal to 1,668 kilometers. I believe the correct designation is 3,500 feet, not kilometers. Snow was falling. The coachman, looking for a way, fell into the river. Having pulled him out, they took him to a neighboring village where they left him, and they themselves tried to go alone, hurrying to the Green Dol station of the Moscow, Zelený Dol in Russian, of the Moscow-Kazan Railroad, located 28 versts away, in order to get on the train going to Kazan in the morning. Snow fell continuously. They got lost again, returned to the same village, took along a Chuvash friend, and began to look for a road along the Ileti River, but they could not find a road in any direction. Then narration continues. I was sitting in the sleigh. The others were wandering back and forth in search of a way. Suddenly, the movie mechanic screamed, "Look!" I saw a light flash first in the distance between the trees of the forest, and then a more opaque, dark, yellow disk similar to a reduced moon, which flew out of the forest and began to fly back and forth for several versts along the flat stretch between the river and the forests, sometimes approaching, then moving away, flying low above the ground and hiding in low thickets for about 20 minutes. A completely yellow disk was worn before my eyes for more than an hour, sometimes visible to me with a matte side, sometimes sparkling with some rays. The space to which it flew stretched for several versts. The speed was different, sometimes small, then very large, and the nature of the flight resembled the flight of a fluff caught up by currents, by air currents. I don't know what kind of phenomenon it was. I only managed to find out with certainty that one of the doctors observed the same phenomenon apparently several years ago in another part of the same Mari region, in the part adjacent to the Arsky canton of the Tatar Republic. And my companion, the film mechanic, told me so much that if I had taken all his stories into the account, I would probably have been completely confused. There was, however, something in his stories that deserved attention. Namely, he himself had seen this phenomenon for the 5th time. He saw it for the first time in autumn, in October, shortly after the first snowfall. Once it seemed he saw it at a distance of 5 sazhen, and it crossed his path in the form of a large fiery wreathing, resembling a large tadpole coming to knot from behind in the form of a long tail. Sazhen, so that you know, a unit of land formerly used in Russia, equal to 7 feet. Let's continue. And every time you see it, you will use your way or misfortune will happen. But then it turned out from conversations that he had lost his way today for the first time with me. And that misfortune, the coachman was drowning. It also happened to him for the first time only today, when he was riding with me. Therefore, if someone had to be considered the culprit of our misfortunes, then they would have to consider me. Meanwhile, the movie mechanic continued to blame all the troubles on the strange disc, not noticing that he answers my deliberately repeated questions in different ways, unconsciously composing answers. Fear has big eyes. My companion was scared without noticing it, was creating a legend. Excited by what he had seen and endured, he did not limit his ideas to what his own imagination was doing. He talked about what others allegedly observed, intertwined folk tales with fire snakes, and in his stories flashed not individual perception, but typical features of folk legends and old legends. He could no longer be a witness, being completely at the mercy of both autosuggestion and that collective suggestion which is transmitted by beliefs and legends that have long become widespread. Therefore, all that I can consider reliable is what I saw myself. And what I saw myself did not contain anything supernatural. Just like the disc I saw, every balloon filled with gas should have flown after some time of the after some of the gases had evaporated, seeping through the shell. It is clear that this was most likely a mechanical device, perhaps, although less likely, a meteorological phenomenon. There was absolutely nothing supernatural about it, but in what form was this simple fact conveyed further? It is clear that in the form that least corresponded to reality. It was interesting to see how the fantastic joined the real without any intention, and what I purposely focused on in more detail, since it represents a typical picture of the creation of faith in supernatural forces and the properties attributed to them, can serve as an example of how unshakable traditions about miracle workers, about signs, about good and evil forces, etc., are composed in everyday life. When the mind sees something new and unknown, it always tries to explain it by comparing it with what is already known, seen, or heard. Indeed, all people who saw disc-shaped objects during this period did not hesitate to fit them into the framework of their worldview. So, for peasants, it was an evil spirit, and for well-educated people, it was a mechanical device or a strange airplane. Reports of mysterious airplanes occasionally appeared in Soviet newspapers of those years, but they never indicated the shape of the object. For example, the newspaper in English, Soviet Siberia, described the observation of October 23, 1927 over Semipalatinsk. On Saturday at 8 p.m., an unknown airplane with 2 searchlights and a muffler on the engine appeared over the city. After making 3 circles over the Irtysh River in the area of the bridge construction, the plane flew away towards Rubtsovka. There was no information about the flight in the city. The case is commented on by the population in all possible ways. The Soviet press briefly covered the observation of mysterious airplanes over Scandinavia in 1933-1934, which the Western and Russian emigre press tried to attribute to the USSR or Japan. The affiliation of the airplanes to the Soviet Union was denied both in the open media, press, and at the diplomatic level. The instruction of the Board of the People's Commissariat of Foreign Affairs of the USSR to the Chargé d'Affaires of the USSR in Norway, Ananov, dated January 27, 1934, in particular stated, "It goes without saying that the USSR has nothing to do with any night flights of mysterious airplanes, about which the press of the Nordic countries has been writing so much lately. You can, if you deem it appropriate, strongly refute such fictions in conversations with Norwegians. On occasion, it is necessary to point out the amazement that these reports of the Norwegian press caused in Moscow. Reports of cigar-shaped objects during this period are quite rare, but nevertheless do occur. They were not perceived by eyewitnesses as something mechanical, like an airplane or an airship. One of these cases was retold from the words of his grandmother by Sergei S. from Moscow. It happened in the middle of the summer of 1931 in the village of Akulova, near Ryazan. One day, what would now be called a UFO appeared over the village. 2 objects were similar, according to my grandmother, 2 logs. That is, they were cylindrical in shape. They were flying at the altitude of 200 to 300 meters. The objects themselves reached a length of 10 to 15 meters. One of them was 2 meters shorter than the other and flew 5 to 7 meters higher than the other one. They didn't make any noise. The objects were red in color and illuminated the entire village with the same light during the flight, so the residents at first thought that there was a fire. The objects flew for about 2 minutes. After they disappeared from sight, the frightened residents said that there would be war. The testimony of Vasily Osipovich Kabakov from Volsky, Volgograd region dates back to the same years. It was in the winter of 1931 or 1932, when I was 11 years old. At 9 o'clock in the evening, getting home from relatives, I saw a flying machine. I didn't know what it was then. It was flying horizontally at a low altitude, about 600 meters away. The visibility was good, and I got a good look at it. The object was cigar-shaped. I could clearly see the lights on it. There was a blue glow in front, in the middle, in the form of a rectangular window. A yellow fire burned. Behind, like a plumage, a green flame shone. A blue searchlight beam was shooting forward from the cylinder. I watched the flight for 15 to 20 seconds. There was no noise. The speed was low. I believe that UFOs, which are being written about a lot now, have flown before. They were just considered to be ghosts. For example, I believe in the existence of UFOs because I saw an object myself. In other cases, on the contrary, eyewitnesses paid attention to strong sound and other effects. One of them was recorded by the Estonian researcher Jüri from the words of Liisi Paisiu, born in 1916, who lived on the island of Saaremaa in the village council of Kjarla, Kogula village, at the Neidi Manor. At the age of 17 or 18, she saw a strange flying object in the sky, which her mother later called a goblin. At that time, that was in 1933-1934, Lizzie lived in the village of Aula, the Kila estate. One evening before sunset, she was left alone in the field after the harvest to stack stacks of rye. 3 more girls were working in the field of the neighboring Tedeschi estate. The weather was exceptionally calm and the sky was clear. Suddenly a strong wind blew up. The girls saw the tops of the trees bending in the forest not far away. From the direction of the village of Sauvera, a strange noise and rumble could be heard, which was constantly approaching. A moment later, a flaming, bright red object appeared in the distance above the Tampus oak grove. It seemed oblong, about 15 meters long and 1.5 meters thick. These dimensions may be inaccurate, as 40 years have passed since then. Anyway, the object was thicker in front than in the back. The UFO was glowing evenly. It left behind a bright red tail around which sparks flew unevenly, accompanied by loud explosions. The strange object moved very slowly over the fields of the Laito and Kieri estates, passing by a frightened girl at a distance of 100 meters. It continued flying over the Viremiaev mowing area and took the direction of Mount Padura, that is, from west to east. It seemed to Liisi that the object was carrying an extremely heavy load. At first, the flight altitude was about 20 meters, and above the field and the mowing area, the object sometimes descended sharply, up to 7-8 meters from the ground, and then reached the previous altitude. The UFO's movements were accompanied by a strong wind and some strange changing sound, sometimes hummed, hissed, rang, bubbled, rattled, and crackled like a blazing fire. The sound became especially strong during descents, but it was not deafening. The crackle of sparks was constantly heard. When the UFO moved away, the old calm returned, but the sound was still audible. After flying about 2.5 kilometers, the goblin suddenly plunged with a loud roar behind the dense Hanyalas forest. There was a crackling sound. A bright red glow rose above the treetops as during a fire, and everything fell silent. Since Liisi was stunned, she could not determine the duration of the phenomenon, but it seemed to her very long. The girls from the Tedeschi estate, Paula, Alai, and Rosie, later questioned her about the goblin. As they saw it, it remains unexplained why the forest did not catch fire and how the UFO with such a slow flight could raise such a strong wind. Why then did no one find any signs of misfortune or remnants of the object at the alleged crash site? In one case, a cigar-shaped object observed by somebody, we have initials VED, in the Tver region, had flaps and feathers, making it look like a fuselage of modern aircraft. Then I was 17 years old. In October or November, I don't remember exactly, in 1932, my friends and I went to school, which was 13 kilometers from our village, in the village of Maksatiha. It was early in the morning, about 7 o'clock. It hadn't snowed yet, so it was very dark. The weather was windless, the sky cloudless. About 8 kilometers from Maksatiha, one of us, I don't remember who now, exclaimed, "Look, flying!" About 500 meters away from us, a luminous object was flying high above the forest in the sky. It was about 3 meters long, and sparks were falling from it in all directions. It was shaped like the fuselage of a modern airplane. Although at that time we not only did not see, but also did not hear what it was. It flew horizontally, and we watched this flight for 2 or 3 minutes. The speed was slightly higher than the speed of a modern passenger airliner. We didn't hear any sound. Everything was happening in complete silence. It was very interesting and beautiful. We did not feel any fear. It was an exciting sight. This is part 1 I will continue with more videos because this is an extensive subject and I've collected a lot of interesting information. So stay tuned for part 2, please. And if you can support my research, please do so. In the you'll find out how to do it in the description to this video. Please subscribe to my videos, to my channel, like my videos. Thank you for your attention to my work.